In this episode of the Smart City podcast, I finish off my conversation with Ronalds Keene. Part 1 of our chat is in episode 39, where you'll hear about what Ellen is passionate about and why she thinks the Smart City concept is so important. In this episode, part 2, Ellen gives us a really interesting perspective on integrating across the different disciplines. And then we also have an insightful discussion around being the CEO of your own life and how this fits into the Smart City space. As always, I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
It's the Smart City Podcast, whoa, with Smart City experts, here we go. Connecting smart technology, both big and small. Smart cities are making life better for all. Big data, emerging trends, self-driving cars and more. The Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.
Let's talk about being proactive and integrating across different disciplines, governments, industries, academia. What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts are that it's really hard. I think in particular it's hard because I am yet to find an industry or a government department. I'm yet to find a person that has a job that doesn't feel like they're at capacity. And obviously with the work that I do with teacher burnout, but burnout, the symptoms of burnout and the problems of burnout are not exclusive to teachers. It's becoming really a modern disease. And I think it's really hard to just keep adding to people's plates and say, well, you're already at capacity. You're doing whatever job you're doing, whether you're a town planner or you're a politician or you're a journalist or you're a freelancer or you're a plumber. You're already pretty much at capacity or you're just trying to survive. Now we're going to expect you to do this next level thing of integrating and communicating more and having sometimes difficult conversations or conversations where you have to educate somebody who has no idea about something that's really important to the work that they are suggesting. And you've got to do the emotional labor of educating them before you can even have the conversation about it. I think it's very difficult to do that integration piece without intentionally taking other things off the plates of the people that are trying to do that communication and integration, because it requires so much thinking and mental and emotional as well as physical energy to do that communication and integration, because it's change. That's a big change. So I think it's hard, and that's my answer.
Yep. No, cool.
It's hard but necessary.
Yeah, I know. I really like that. I think we haven't really spoken about that capacity piece because it's so important. And yeah, I feel like I was kind of at capacity trying to do more than what I could possibly do. And yeah, you get burnt out. And then you can't do anything. You're completely useless. And even the stuff you're trying to do, you're not doing well because your brain is fried.
Yeah, and then people leave organisations who are actually really valuable. They've got excellent, amounts of experience and knowledge, and they leave not because even necessarily that there's anything wrong with that organisation or the job, or it's just simply because they've burnt out. I mean, to use a kind of technical, analogy, like a motor, in your car, you need to put petrol in the car every day, every time you want to drive a long way for that, until we have the electric cars, obviously. But you need to put petrol in your car for it to keep going. You also, and that's like the everyday maintenance, but then you also need to be taking the car to a mechanic every 6 months to get it, serviced. That's like the extra level maintenance, because if you skip that piece, eventually you can keep putting petrol in the car, but eventually the car's going to break down. Again, until we have the automated vehicles and all of that. But I'm sure we'll have similar issues with those where they need maintenance, and human beings do as well. And I think we don't want to ruin these amazing assets that are our human brains and human bodies, that simply through a kind of rush to get something done more quickly, or a lack of awareness to think, if I just took something off that person's plate so that they could do this other extra project and have the headspace to do this other extra project. It would, the integration piece might get done. But we're impatient, and we're, again, at the kind of 20th century mindset of just cut down all the forests now to do all the development now, and we won't worry about the ramifications that'll have on the atmosphere in the future, because we just want to have the economic boost from the new development now.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Short-term thinking.
Yeah. And the smart city concept is definitely a long-term journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about emerging trends. Any thoughts on ones that other people aren't talking about?
Yeah, I think going back to my my probably background in the education and the teacher burnout space, I think burnout is something that we're not talking about enough. I do see it as an emerging trend in many industries, and it's not the good kind of trend. At the same time, I think there are much smaller pockets of people that are talking about like slow living, minimalism. I mean, you interviewed Colin Wright. The kind of probably the values-based approach to life that you and I are living now. I mean, and that's not been a quick change. It's not been a short-term change to our lives. It's been something that we've sort of gradually made choices over time to make sure that we were able to, and intentional choices. Yeah. So if I use myself as an example, I didn't just have a bad day and quit my teaching job and start freelancing the next day and everything was fine. Like, it was a sort of 3-year transition of being part-time teaching and building things up on the side, et cetera, et cetera. So, and also making intentional choices about not having a mortgage that was 10 times bigger than we currently have. I mean, the bank probably would have lent us that money, but we chose to have a smaller house, smaller footprint, I suppose, to have to worry about. And I think that's also a bit of a trend that I'm seeing. And I realize this is not really a tech-based trend, but I do think it's smart cities where people are choosing slow living, maybe choosing to have less, live with less, and that includes less stress and less workload and less commuting, because they've made some intentional proactive choices that are a bit counter-cultural at the moment, but they are in response to the emerging trend of the rat race that I think life has kind of become.
And people are using, they're over that, and then they're using technology to their advantage to make their lives slower.
And that's the bit that I feel like is maybe not being talked about enough, is that we could be using, rather than using technology to be able to do more, because doing more is the
increase the pace.
Be all end all. We could actually use technology to chill out more. Like really, I mean, I think about a washing machine is a piece of technology that allows us to not have to wash our clothes by hand anymore. Like, that's a significant change in the lives of human beings in the last, 100 and something years that we take totally for granted now. And I also really, when I was a teacher, I was a music teacher, and I used to love explaining to kids that, like, 100 years ago, if you wanted to hear music, unless you were really rich and happened to have a gramophone in your house, and even then that was very, very new technology 100 years ago, you had to hear the music live. Like, 150 years ago, if you wanted to hear music, you had to hear the music performed live in front of you. Now we all have these things the size of our hand that have 65 days worth of music in our phones, in our pockets. And that's actually good. Like, technology can create leisure for us. It can create, and it's taken away. We no longer have to wash our clothes by hand anymore. We can put the washing machine on and then listen to a song on our iPad or a podcast. Technology can help us. It's that livability piece, but it's also the intentionally work less, live more thing. And I think that that's a trend. It's certainly something that I see in pockets, but it's really not a mainstream idea yet. It's still treated quite one size fits all. You're either a minimalist that is this way and you live this kind of a minimalist life, or you've got too many pairs of shoes to call yourself a minimalist. Like, it's not actually as one size fits all as that. But it's hard for the rest of the population who's not clued into any of these concepts to understand that it's a bit more nuanced than that, because it's so far away from the way most people in the Western world still live.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that's all well and good, but it can never happen like that. Like, it's all too good to be true. You can't possibly, yes, that happens for, the very small minority may become internet famous or whatever, but unless you can do that, you won't be able to make any money, because the people you're probably talking to, didn't work for them, or it couldn't possibly work for them.
And it doesn't work for everyone.
And there are a lot of people who have huge amounts of followers online and flat broke. I mean, that's, to be honest, that's why I'm freelancing, because self-care for teachers is not my full-time thing yet. But then I've fallen in love with some of the work that I'm doing as a freelancer, and I'm really glad that I'm able to do both. And I think it's that idea of, well, we can't make it happen, or it seems a long way off, so we won't even try. Yeah, that'll never happen. Well, no, it might happen, but it might take you 5 years of gradual changes to get there. But we're just so addicted to the quick fix idea that, and of course there are people in there. It's huge privilege, for you and I to have been able to make these choices. I mean, compared to the vast majority of people in human history, let alone the vast majority of people on this planet, we have access already to huge amounts of resources that most people don't have, and huge amounts of opportunities that most people don't have. So yes, there is a privilege piece to it. But if we're talking about the Western world, most of the choices that you and I have made are available to most people. It's just that they look at what we're doing now and they see their, mortgage payment that they have to keep their six-figure job to pay, and they think, well, I couldn't possibly, the six-figure job that they hate, that is, increasing their blood pressure year on year, which is meaning that they're more likely to have a heart attack, when they're 45 or whatever. But they just see the mortgage payment and go, well, I have to keep the job. Yeah, maybe this week you do, but if you were really intentional about it over the next 3 years, you can maybe get out of that job, or have a different house, or don't send your kid to the most expensive private school just because that's what the people in your neighborhood expect, because you're kind of trying to keep up with Joneses who you don't even like. You know what I mean? Like, it's not an overnight change, but changes that make your life happier and healthier are never quick fixes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it comes down to being the CEO of your own life.
Exactly.
And
that's a good concept.
Yeah. I don't know where I heard that concept.
I think it was probably on the Teacher Wellbeing podcast.
It was on the Teacher Wellbeing
Series
podcast.
3, episode 9, I think, with Lena West.
And I think I loved it because it gave me permission to embrace my preferences.
Yeah.
And I think even, you might have to keep that job this week, like you said, but making gradual changes even within that job to set yourself boundaries based on your preferences, because if you're in that job, you're adding value to that job. Therefore, you can have conversations that you thought possibly weren't possible, because you should appreciate that you have that job and it has to be like this all the time. So you could still keep the job, but you've set boundaries now that make it more, livable and happy and accessible and that kind of thing. So I think, the CEO of your own life, it really comes down to that, and it fits in very well to the smart city space, I think, because it's an emerging trend that we're not talking about, because I think it's happening, more and more.
I think it's happening particularly, maybe just because of the spaces that I'm in, but I certainly see that being discussed quite a lot in the kind of millennial women in freelance business scene, because I think we're in many ways it's maybe the next stage of feminism, which I use quite broadly to mean making life better for all humans, really. But we've gone from the maybe the 1950s, where it was, well, women have very, very rigid roles, and so did men, right? Everyone had very rigid roles, which obviously has a lot of drawbacks. There's some benefits too, because you don't have the agony of choice. And then, there was the next wave, I guess, where women were able to work outside the home. And now it's kind of got to the next phase where you're expected, everybody is expected to work outside the home, and people are realizing that that's not the be all end all either. It's great that we have the choice, but then, forcing women back to work 6 months after they've had a baby is also not right for everybody. Again, it comes down to that it's not one size fits all. And being the CEO of your own life is about being able to say, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. Maybe I have to do that thing that doesn't work for me right now because of the stage of life I'm in or the job that I've got, and I want to keep the job for various reasons, or we're living in this city right now for various reasons, and it's maybe not ideal. We'd prefer not to have to commute like this, but we do at the moment. But we can plan for, rather than planning, all right, well, I'll keep doing this for the next 45 years until I retire. But, well, maybe you're just planning it for the next 5 years until you get to a stage of life where you can make a slightly different choice, and it's not complete retirement it's not doing something that's against your values or that you hate for 45 years until retirement, but it's about and then retirement is not necessarily the goal either, because if you enjoy what you're doing day to day life, and Colin Wright said, as well as talking about the being intentional to avoid the science fiction dystopian future, he also made a comment about so this was in episode 17. He also made a comment about being able to avoid some of the health and happiness detracting features of life. Not avoid, but avoid the unnecessary bits. I mean, there's a level of learning and growth that happens in all, I think, life's difficulties. Yeah, exactly. And we don't want to avoid them altogether, but we can avoid the unnecessary ones so that we have more headspace for the really important life stuff, I suppose. And I think it's a big mindset shift for people perhaps of our parents' generation. And they don't have to make it. I mean, if what they're doing is working for them, great. But I think our generation is going, I don't want to do something that I hate for the next 45 years just so that I can retire with a super big house and a caravan. It's just not, that doesn't appeal to me. I could buy the caravan now and go around Australia and do some freelancing and, there's other options, I guess. And the internet has made that possible.
Definitely. Cool. Well, this has been an awesome chat. I feel like it's just one of our morning coffees at the cafe. So I hope everyone else has enjoyed it as well. I only have one last question, which is how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so there's a couple of places. If you are a teacher or are interested in teacher wellbeing, you can find me at selfcareforteachers.com.au and at selfcareforteachers on Facebook and Instagram, or you can email Ellen at selfcareforteachers.com.au. And if you're interested in my freelance services, digital content, podcasts, online course curriculum development, etc., that's all at ellenronaldskeene.com or at ellenronaldskeene on Facebook and Instagram. And I do have a Twitter, but I can't remember what it is because I think I've sent 2 tweets.
We can put it all in the show notes so people can click away.
And you could email me, Ellen at ellenronaldskeene.com.
Very good. Cool. Okay, well, thanks so much. And, look forward to talking to you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Zoe.
See ya.
Bye.
It's the Smart City Podcast. Whoa!
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart City Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes can be found at thesmartcitypodcast.com. If you have any questions or comments for me or any of my guests, connect with me via email, zoe@thesmartcitypodcast.com, or via the socials. I'm on Twitter and Facebook at smartcitypod. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.